Okay, the recording has started, and this is the July 6th, 2020 Crossplane Community Meeting. People feel free to add your name as an attendee to the document here, the agenda doc, and I'll drop a link in the chat directly to the document here. And feel free to add your name. If not, I will add us later on, so I can take care of that. But let's get started on 0.13, which is the current milestone that we are working towards. Starting last milestone in 0.12, we have been tracking issues at the organization level, so we can track the status of issues on a board across all repositories in the Crossplane organization. So here is the 0.13 board, and we don't need to walk through every ticket here, but we can talk about some of the more important ones that folks are working on now. I had called out a couple of various feature areas for design, like high-level feature areas for discussion here on code generation and provider acceleration, and the Crossplane agent I know there's a lot of work on, and the package manager as well. So let's probably those issues specifically. I'd love to get an update to share with the community here. So the design for Crossplane agent is first in this review column here. So move off, if you want to just give us a quick update on this Crossplane agent, the status of it, then that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So we have started the design, and I've got great feedback from Luke and Nick, but he said he didn't complete the review yet. But the general idea is that you will install the Crossplane agent into your cluster, and you will annotate your namespace with the target namespace that you would like to sync to. At a high level, maybe I should explain what it actually does. The Crossplane agent, what it does is basically you put it into like any Kubernetes cluster, and then you connect it to a Crossplane that runs anywhere. And after this connection is made, all your requirements get synced into this central cluster, and you get back the connection details. Secrets that you can use in your applications, like other stuff like mounting to the pod and other things, which is like changing, actually like replacing the Kubernetes application stuff that we had before. And just like before, it was like in the central cluster you got the Kubernetes application that pushes the secret, and also like your pods, your deployment. But now you are interacting with the remote cluster directly, and you're pulling the secrets, and you're requesting the infrastructure and you pull the secrets, and the design has some details like how that's implemented. And one of the important area is that like how you would specify the service account credentials to connect to central cluster. And right now its status is that you either supply one service account as default, like a secret that contains the credentials as default during the installation, or you can specify the secret on the namespace annotations. So that's for the service account credential. For the namespace pairings, there's only one way, which is you have to annotate your namespace with the name of the target namespace. So we always have one-to-one namespace pairing between your remote cluster and the central cluster. So let's say you got 3 clusters with 3 namespaces in each. You will have to have 9 namespaces in the central cluster so that you can have one-to-one pairing. So yeah, the work is ongoing, but I think this week we will be able to wrap it up and start implementation, I hope.
Cool, Vapek, thanks for the update on that. The other 2 major feature areas that I had identified in the agenda document was the package manager refactor. So let's do that one next since it's in this column. And if there's anything that people want to call out on the board too, feel free to at the end of the section, no problem. Dan, do you want to give us a quick update on package manager refactoring?
Yeah, for sure. So there is a design doc open for that. It's still marked as work in progress because there's a pretty good amount of discussion happening on that. I think there's 100-something comments at this point. But I've gotten great review from Muvafiq and Nick and Jared. And I think we're moving in a good direction there. This touches a lot of different aspects of the Crossplane ecosystem. So having to kind of like get a lot of people's input on it to make sure we're satisfying all the requirements there and doing what we need to do. And also making sure we're addressing all of the users' needs for packages, both on the authoring side and on the consumption side. So definitely feel free to take a look at that design doc. Most of the concepts are pretty current, but the actual execution on what happens could be changing a little bit. So just keep that in mind if you're giving a review there. But yeah, I think we're in a good direction. And like Muvafiq said, I'm hoping to settle on a pretty strong design so that we can move towards implementation by the end of this week. But definitely we'll keep that issue or that PR updated.
Yep, that is PR 1616. Easy enough to remember here. All right, thanks, Dan. And the last issue or feature area or investigation area, I suppose, that I was very curious about. I don't think Casey's on the call, but Nick, would you be able to give us an update about the provider acceleration efforts?
It's still in R&D. There's no artifacts from it yet. Where I'm syncing with Casey later today, and we're having a meeting to basically decide whether we do a go, no-go on this, which is not really going to be a design doc. It's more going to be here's a list of known risks and things that we're not going to be able to have when we go to Terraform. That's about all that I have to say about it at the moment.
Cool, that sounds good. Okay. Were there any other issues on the board for 0.13 or not on the board that folks wanted to bring up as topics to discuss or concerns at all?
One thing to mention is I know there's been a couple folks that have been talking about the S3 buckets. And so I just want to encourage anyone who is working on any of those open issues to feel free to reach out to us in Slack if you want more like one-on-one guidance or even a group get together to plan on how we want to knock some of those things out. So yeah, if anyone here is kind of a newer contributor, then please feel free to reach out on those.
And Dan, a quick question I had. So, because I know you synced with folks at Red Hat and like Krish last week about the effort that they were undertaking to have the Quay.io operator be able to use Crossplane resources. Do you have a quick update on that out of curiosity?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't think Krish is on this call, but Krish over at Red Hat has been basically putting together some compositions for use with the Quay operator. So it uses it might be one or multiple S3 buckets, a Postgres database, and a Redis cluster to back the service. So the operator, right now, it will either run those in cluster for you, or you can specify connection details. So obviously that's a pretty good use case for using Crossplane there. There are some changes that had to happen upstream in the Quay operator. Specifically, it didn't allow for providing a secret for a Redis connection. So it was saying, I'm always going to run this in cluster while you can have an external Postgres database. So there need to be some slight adjustments there. But yeah, we're looking pretty good. I think on the S3 side, since that's not a V1 Beta 1 API, it's missing some of the ACL customization for the buckets. So that's one of the reasons why there's a push to get that to V1 Beta 1. And Krish is definitely interested in working on that. I believe right now he either has a job that runs and basically hits the S3 API directly, to change the permissioning of the bucket, or he just does it manually in the console, which obviously is not the experience we want. So we want to make sure to get that updated so it's a really streamlined effort.
Yeah, that's a good point. I really like too that when we have incidents or instances of like real use cases, informing some of the functionality and features that go into what Crossplane supports. I think that's awesome. Cool. Okay. So I think that was everything that we had down here for updates on 0.13. I anticipate that will be a typical mid-month release. I don't necessarily have an exact date that I've heard proposed or that I've proposed myself, but middle of the month. Typical minor every middle of the month minor release still sounds, as far as I know, like the go-ahead plan as usual. Phil, were you able to open a PR to update the roadmap for 0.13?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now, so I'll go ahead and drop that in. And then I know we're doing some work on getting the OAM stuff, the OAM stuff split out of core and then installable separately under the Crossplane org. So is that something that we think we're going to get done in time for 0.13, or is that like a future release?
I think that, let me just double check to see where the participants are.
Yeah, Ryan and Hong Chao are on.
Yeah, so I believe that most of the work to actually move things into the OEM Kubernetes runtime repo is done. We do need to figure out the build system for that. I don't know, Jared, if that's something that you have some bandwidth to help out with this week on Jenkinsifying that thing. We do. There is. I'm actually not sure how to order this. There is an open issue to consider a more open build process that's sort of more friendly to folks who aren't outbound employees. I'm not sure if this is the right time to do that, but I'd say that's going to be the biggest blocker here. The only other thing to do is just deleting the code from Crossplane Core, which is easy to do. I'm just holding off on having a packaged and released version of the new OEM standalone thing that we can release.
Cool. Yeah, and I have as a agenda item for later on here to talk about Jenkins build and if we should do like options there for opening it up or using other build systems, whatever. So we have an agenda topic for that too.
Just cool. Curious. This is Ryan. So how difficult is it to create a build for the OM Kubernetes runtime alone? Because I'm currently basically kind of build a Helm chart for it now, Helm chart. So people can actually just install a standalone Helm chart, but it's not under the Crossplane org. I don't have the Crossplane org's Docker Hub, whatever, all these credentials or anything. So I just use the OM credentials. So there's a Helm chart there, but it looks like I looked at other repos. They have their own way to build. I looked at their makefiles. There's some sort of things I don't understand. Just you putting a few things and suddenly voila, everything works. I don't know how easy is it to make that work.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a pretty typical pattern we have in place with the build submodule and like the Jenkins files, et cetera. So that pattern is used pretty commonly, and the logic that's in the build submodule will do the Helm chart for build for you, along with Docker images or docs and all sorts of other stuff. But then use those credentials to publish to the artifact locations that Crossplane officially uses, et cetera. So because a lot of that logic is codified and reusable, it should be fairly straightforward for someone who's done it before and has access to some of that stuff. As I think that's where we'd run into some of the, it's not the best developer experience, and there's some access issues that we're happy to help out and do the things to make, first we should have the conversation if that's the right way to go, but we're happy to do the support work to make sure that works for us if that's the way we want to go. And so that we could get that solved and have it very consistent with the rest of the Crossplane's release mechanisms.
Okay, sounds good. Just one clarification. So for those who are not Applebound employees, will they have access to the Crossplane, Docker, or Helm chart, all these repos?
Yeah, they should. Like I've tried to get like maintainer access. Like if you're a maintainer on a repo, then you should be able to have access to those artifact locations. That sounds totally reasonable. But for Jenkins, I guess we can get into it in a bit too. But for Jenkins, I was working with Hong Chao on that. I don't understand why Jenkins isn't doing what I ask it to. So there's some things to work through, perhaps.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
Yep. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, this is Hong Chao. This is something I also want to mention in the meeting. So currently, the Jenkins on the OEM runtime repo, they are duplicate. Like currently, we have both the GitHub Actions and also the outbound Jenkins running to run the test and making sure the code is qualified for a merge. But most of testing has been duplicated in both CI. And we don't have access to the Jenkins one. So I'm wondering if we could be given the access to the Jenkins scripts so that we can modify those and make sure they don't duplicate.
Yeah, let's. I mean, it's relevant right now. So let's just go ahead and have this conversation now. I think that's perfectly fine with me. I'll just bump that in the agenda there, and let's be on this topic now. If anybody has any disputes with that, then speak now. But we can just have this conversation now, I think. So yeah, so I think like the Jenkins files, that kind of ask Jenkins or tell Jenkins how to use what build commands to run and where artifacts should go, etc. Those are those are per repo. So you can pretty much the normal pattern is that you can copy it from one repo and then put it into your repo and make the modifications you need. So the Jenkins files themselves, I don't think there are any access issues with those at all. The issue that I do see so far is allowing write access or administrative access on Jenkins to particular contributors to the project, because it does all of its authentication through a GitHub OAuth plugin, and so it knows when you log into Jenkins, it knows who you are on your GitHub profile, and the configuration that we have set up is to, for each repo, use the permissions that the GitHub repo defines. So if you're an admin on a GitHub repository, you should have admin access on Jenkins to that same build for that same repository. But as we're kind of working on that to try to figure that out, it doesn't seem like it's providing that access, which I don't quite understand. So I want to troubleshoot through that. But essentially, I was expecting that the access that you have to the repo in GitHub should be the same access that you have in Jenkins as well.
Yep, cool. Yeah, another issue is currently we also have another contributor to the repo, as you can see, very active contributing code and commenting on issues. His name is Joe, and we are wondering how we can add him to have the maintainer access so that he can review and merge PR. At least he can approve PRs and something like that.
Yeah, and so as per the most recent Crossplane organization governance, the adding maintainers to a repository is the decision of the existing maintainers on the repository. So if a majority of the repository maintainers are in favor of adding a new maintainer to it, then that's okay. If you don't have ability to do that in GitHub for some reason, then you can just let me know and I'll look into that. But in the GitHub repo access, you should be able to add that person as another someone with maintainer access, just like you have maintainer access already. And hopefully, then if the GitHub auth plugin for Jenkins worked the way I expected it to, then that would automatically then, because they then have maintainer access on the repository and GitHub, that they would then have maintainer access to the Jenkins build as well. That was the goal, but that's what we're still trying to figure out why it doesn't work.
I see. So I think the current issue is there's nothing called owner file, and it seems like the GitHub repo doesn't read this as giving someone access to it. But like, yeah, so I like what I get here is so if we want to add a maintainer, just tell you, right? Talk with you, Jared.
You should be able to self-service that. That should be, because in the governance, the maintainers for a repository are allowed to add new maintainers themselves. But if for some reason you can't add that, then let's talk about that and I'll try to help out with that. But the governance says that you should be allowed to do that as the maintainers of that repository. You could do that, you know, with autonomy.
Oh, but like how does the access like interoperate with this maintainers list?
Like the maintainers like in Jenkins or in GitHub?
Like GitHub.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
I don't think that the actual configuration of the security of these repos is in line with governance, I think is maybe the problem. I think the governance says that the maintainers should be able to do this. I'm not sure if maintain access is enough to grant other people maintain access, or whether you need owner.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the intent of the governance is that you should be able to do that. So if there's an issue that, you know, the way it's implemented, then we should look into that.
Yeah, Hongqiao, it's not like with like Prow and Tide and that sort of stuff, where if you actually edit this file, that it's gonna actually change the permissions either.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Understand.
Oh, yeah. Sorry if I didn't understand the question. But yeah, so it's basically two parts, like update the owner's file. So, which is just informative. It's just to let people know, you know, publicly who the maintainers are. And then the, you know, access to the repositories through the standard GitHub settings, manage access thing, which is, you know, not automated and a human has to do that. And
Yeah,
if you don't have access to that, then we need to figure that out.
So I'm looking at the access to the runtime repo now, and several like Hongqiao, Ryan, Sun, etc. have maintained access but not admin. And my suspicion is that you might need admin to add other people as.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Cool. Got it.
And then I wonder if that would fix the Jenkins thing too. If the Jenkins says, "Oh, cool, you're an admin on this repository. I'll let you do things on my Jenkins too." That might be the solution.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, let's look at that further after this meeting then. Thanks,
Yeah.
Nick, for the information there.
So I have another question regarding this Jenkins and the test, because as far as I know, the reason we add the GitHub CI is we want to run E2E test. By E2E, I mean talking to a real Kubernetes API server, because most of the unit tests are mocking the API server. And for many of the logic, it's pretty much define the purpose. Because if you mocked off, there's not much logic left in some big chunk of the code. That's why I added the GitHub CI and I pick up a few bugs through that, because you cannot really test with all mocks. So I remember at that time, because Jenkins at that time, at least even now, it's a black box. I heard it's not easy to do the E2E test on Jenkins. I don't know if it's true, because Hongqiao mentioned we have two systems, right? So if Jenkins can do the E2E, then we can get rid of the GitHub CI thing. And another thing is I want that test also be counted onto the code coverage, because currently I think the code coverage only counts the unit tests through the Jenkins system, but at least some of the code actually is more covered through the E2E than the CI. Is there any solution there, or am I understanding it correctly?
On your first point, for the for running the end-to-end tests on Jenkins, that's definitely possible. You just basically have to have the Jenkins script set up the kind cluster for you, as you're doing currently with the GitHub Actions right now. You know, the framework does support having basically a kube config that you can use. So you just need to make that accessible. We can talk more out of band if you want to get that set up on Jenkins. I think I mean, I don't speak for everyone, but I think if you wanted to keep using GitHub Actions and it's working well for those integration tests for right now, or those end-to-end tests, that seems like a reasonable solution to me. But I also understand that, you know, having a single CI tool is also useful.
Actually, actually, I don't mind having two systems because they have kind of two different purpose. But the more important part is how to count the E2E test into the code coverage. Because again, many times I think E2E test covers the code better than UI test when most of the code is basically, apply one, talk to API server, 5 talk to API server code. Just that most of the reconcile like that.
Yeah, Ryan, I'm not sure how we, I don't off the top of my head know how we can merge code coverage from E to E and also the unit tests or upload them separately or something. We're using CodeJump.
This is something we actually studied before. Like previously, like in Alibaba, we also like did massive like end-to-end tests and also and had the coverage like show up only covering the unit test. So basically, like how the Go coverage work is that when you run Go test, it will output a CAR file which like generates the coverage rate, and the coverage will read this file. In order to like have the coverage show up, you need to generate this file. And how this work is that like even though the most of the environment is created as end-to-end environment, but actually when you run the controller code, it's actually still run as a unit test. That's the only way to make the coverage work. And I think tools like KubeBuilder provide such functionality. But we need to somehow change the test code to align with that.
And presumably you need to run them all in the same place as well, right? Because you need to aggregate them all out into one coverage file.
Yeah, that's why I asked. Because I think it would be very difficult to combine the Jenkins one and the GitHub CI one. But I'm not sure if it's possible to do it in Jenkins if they combine into one CI system.
I think that both GitHub and Jenkins are just runners of scripts, right? So when it comes to invoking and running tests, both systems are capable of doing it. I'm sure that we can figure out getting Jenkins to do it, or that we can figure out going to GitHub to do it. I think there's a couple of things at play here. One has nothing to do with whether it's Jenkins or GitHub. It's just that we've automated all of this with a large submodule of make files that grew out of Rook and that lives in an Upbound org that has barriers to entry to contribute. One of them is just the learning curve is very big to understand how it works. And the other one is that it is under the Upbound org on GitHub and is used by several internal Upbound projects. So you can't really just change it for Crossplane. You have to, folks who don't work for Upbound have to account for changes that may impact things that they can't see. So I think that we need to fix that. So I think there's some things to be done with just the build submodule. And then there's also a question of what do we use to invoke the build submodule and whether that is Jenkins or something else like GitHub. My personal suspicion and gut feeling is that GitHub will be, it's more self-documenting. It's easier for community members to discover. It integrates better with GitHub, obviously. So I suspect that would probably be the lowest maintenance cost going forward. But there is a pretty big migration cost for us to go from Jenkins, which we've built all of our tooling from. We've got a lot of Jenkins files and automations. Our entire release process for everything that the Upbound team releases assumes using Jenkins for doing things like tagging and pushing and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement here, but I think it's going to be a little bit tricky. The easiest thing is going to be probably lowest work is going to be to move people onto Jenkins. But then I think that that's sort of centralizing people onto a system that's fairly opaque to people who don't work for Upbound. Whereas the bigger push would be, and I think the thing that would lead us to a more open, more sustainable system that everyone could help maintain would be to move people onto GitHub Actions. But that's a big change to all of our existing repos that we haven't budgeted time for this quarter at Upbound's end.
Thanks. Fair enough. I think that's a good assessment.
Yeah, so not sure what the way forward there is, but that's where we're at.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, and either way, in the meantime, that hopefully we can get the right access to Jenkins so that you can be able to rerun your builds or kick off builds or change some config and stuff like that, and have the access to do that, and that would, in the short term, alleviate some pain too, just on day-to-day stuff.
Jared, would that access that you're talking about give people, would the folks who are working day to day on the OAM runtime be able to actually go and add that project to Jenkins and get it all set up and do releases and all that kind of thing? Or is this just access to basically rebuild and run jobs?
Yeah, I think it's with the rebuild and run jobs for sure, but then it's also like Jenkins configuration for that pipeline, for the pipeline for that repo. So I don't think you wouldn't be able to go globally, you know, add new pipelines and new repos and stuff like that. But for that specific repo in the pipeline for that repo, you can change configuration and do stuff, tweak stuff there like that.
Yeah, well, one thing that I guess I'm thinking about is that what process we will have, if any, for getting new, you know, I just wrote a tiny provider and I would like it to be released in Jenkins sort of thing. And I guess that may fall to the steering committee or something like that to add new things to Jenkins, just as a sustainable process for like adding and releasing things and figuring out CI/CD ownership sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point, Nick. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, if it does make GitHub Actions fairly appealing if it's inside the repo itself, you know, like the whole reuse thing, like a lot of logic that was built around release processes and handling a lot of some complications around publishing release artifacts and building and versioning and all that jazz, like we figured out, and I'd love to be able to reuse that stuff, but GitHub Actions, like self-service integrated directly into the repo is pretty appealing from that perspective.
Yeah, I'm not sure how GitHub Actions would work with like, presumably if we want people to be able to upload Helm charts to like the Crossplane charts bucket and, you know, push things to Docker Hub and whatnot, there's, even with GitHub Action, there's still going to be some question of when we're setting up, you know, when folks like the you know, OEM maintainers are facing this, you know, how do they get onboarded? How do they get those credentials? How do they set it up, sort of thing? Yeah,
totally. Yep. Good point. Okay, cool. So that was the first topic here in the community topic section. This was the community day recordings. I mentioned this last meeting, so it's not new news, but I just wanted to keep this link here for folks that wanted to see the playlist with all the recordings of all the demos and talks and panels and everything from the community day last month. They are right there in that YouTube playlist. Hashdan, do you want to give us an update on the latest TPS episodes?
Yeah, for sure. So last week we had on Pop from Sysdig and Falco, and it was a really awesome show that I enjoyed quite a bit. And it showed some of the different things that you can get from running Falco or Sysdig in cluster with with Crossplane or on remote clusters that Crossplane is managing. We also showed off some pretty cool composition stuff, which we'll probably have a show pretty soon dedicated exclusively to that and exploring all the different functionality there, because I think that could be pretty helpful to end users. But some of the things that you can get from running Falco or Sysdig in your cluster is like monitoring outgoing connections and stuff. So one of the things we looked at was since each provider runs as its own pod, you're able to see the actual outgoing connections from each of those. So we could see those, you know, making requests to AWS and GCP and the APIs when they're reconciling resources and that sort of thing. But the primary thing is security around this. So you can imagine the future that maybe we'd like to make it a little bit easier when you provision a new cluster using Crossplane, that you might want to install some of these agents over there. And so thinking about what that might look like will definitely be interesting. Folks also have a lot of other projects that they like to run kind of across all clusters. So yeah, it's definitely a cool episode that I'd encourage you to check out. And the repo has the manifest from it, of course, as always. So you can check those out if you want to try out some composition stuff.
Dan, can you drop a link to the assets in the agenda document also?
Definitely.
Sweet, thank you. Cool, and then we have a wonderful CNCF update. The sandbox process was updated to be more streamlined, and we definitely got the benefits of that for sure. So Crossplane was officially accepted and voted on by the Technical Oversight Committee of the CNCF. So we are now officially a CNCF project. We wrote a blog post about this here on the blog.crossplane.io. And we are like on the sandbox page as an entry there and everything. So it is as official gets. So thanks everybody for the work on that and the help from the SIG app delivery as well. I see Harry joined the call too. So thanks for the help from the SIG there, Harry. So super excited about that. And there is a set of onboarding tasks that we will do to complete the transfer of the IP and you know, get all the like service desk and you know, marketing and everything. Oh, sweet, DevStats is up now. Perfect, that's great. So a whole bunch of like services that the CNCF offers to get onboarded with all those things. So we will follow up on making sure that all of these are completed, so that Crossplane is reaping the benefits of being an official CNCF project now. So great work to everybody on that. All right, Dan, I assume this was your agenda item for the URLs in the doc.crds.dev.
Yep, sorry, I forgot to put my username on that. I just wanted to give an update for anyone who is using these links. On Friday, the links to specific resources in the repo were updated. So now if you go to a repo, if you follow the URL by the GVK, or actually the GKV, I guess, that's where the resource is going to be. And you can still append the version tag for that as well. So yeah, you can see up there that it's followed by the group and then the kind and then the version. So before it was using the path actually in the repo to identify what resource it was. So the issue with that is, like for Crossplane, we have multiple charts in the same Crossplane repo that have those CRDs under them. So we're getting duplicates. Thanks, Phil, for opening the issue related to that on the repo. So we were able to address that. One thing to note here is that now what it's actually doing is going through and parsing all of the CRDs, and if it finds one, you know, after it's already parsed the same GVK, it's just overriding it. So if you had multiple different representations, which we don't have in Crossplane, but if you did, you could end up with, you know, differing versions or not the version you want. So for Crossplane, this works pretty well, and you can see that there's only like 25 instead of 42 CRDs discovered in the repo and that sort of thing. But to guard against that case where it's kind of parsing the wrong representation of the CRD, we're going to support having config files in your repo root. So you can basically say, you know, allow parsing on this path or not on this one, et cetera, to make it a little more intelligent there. And you'll see on the main page that we've added a few more projects, and adding them slowly before we kind of just open up to everything allows us to kind of like hit issues and fix them, and slowly grow and then say, okay, I think we have a pretty strong base. So anyway, if you have any links that are being used like that, make sure to update those so people can use them.
I like being able to sort by version as well, Dan. So you could like see like what the most stable APIs are and like what the newest or, you know, most recently introduced ones are as well. Like TBS episode 18 with Move Off, adding the pub sub stuff. That's so cool.
Yeah, that was
nice.
Awesome.
That's nice. Okay. And Nick added an agenda item as well for being offline for a good 10 or 11 days here, Nick. Godspeed, bon voyage. Any other notes about that, Nick? You're going to be like off the grid too, right?
Yeah, just a heads up. I'll be out of cell coverage from the 13th to the 24th, so I'll definitely be offline. So if anyone thinks they might need me during that time, it would be a good idea to reach out to me this week and make sure that we get everything sorted out before I'm back.
Yeah, July 13th. That's like next Monday, right? Like basically next week.
So this is my last week online, and then I'll be off for 2 weeks and then back.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, have a great trip, Nick. I'm definitely excited to hear about it when you get back and see some pictures and stuff. Cool. So that was the end of the community topics section. Are there any other agenda items in the community section before we move onward to PRs? Okay. So we briefly brought up this design PR, but Muvafiq, you added it to the agenda here. Did you need some more discussion on it?
I don't know. I had added before you called it out in the initial section.
Got it. Cool. Well, there's a second link to it now here. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's the end of all the agenda items then. Did anybody have any other agenda or PR to talk about or anything before we adjourn?
So I have a question about the agent thing. I didn't fully read the PR. Just I just heard the explanation earlier. I just wonder how does it, so I heard my understanding is it's going to replace that Kubernetes application. And I'm just trying to understand how does that, on a high level, how does it work? Like so you have Crossplane running on one Kubernetes cluster as a control plane. And you have your users' workload running on somewhere else. Previously, my understanding is the Crossplane control plane is going to kind of package everything into this Kubernetes application and send it to the remote cluster. So without that, how does it work now on a high level?
Yeah, I mean the design has some more details, but at a high level, what happens is that the agent will pull the CRDs from the central Crossplane cluster, and then in your remote cluster now, you will interact directly with that remote cluster instead of the cluster where Crossplane runs, and you will just create the requirement custom resources, and the agent will sync it with the central cluster and bring back the connection secret that you can use in your pods. So how you would package your application would be have a Helm chart, your pods, deployments, and all that stuff, and also your Crossplane requirements like MySQL instance and others. And you just deploy that. The agent will will take care of bringing the secret into the remote cluster and dealing with all that stuff.
Just quick question. When you say deploy, does it deploy to I think you would deploy it to the control plane cluster, right? Instead of remote cluster.
I have a diagram if that might help that we've been shopping around to some folks.
Yeah.
Is that in the design here, Phil, or is that something on your screen?
Something on my screen.
Oh, okay. If you want to share that,
Sure.
I could stop.
You want to share it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
stop.
And then maybe Muvafiq, you can just talk to it.
Yeah. So the actual deployment of Kubernetes native resources. Yeah, there you go. So you see the application Kubernetes cluster with applications. So here applications mean pods, deployments, stateful set, and others, alongside with Crossplane types. For example, MySQL instance requirement and others. However, the difference is that they're not reconciled in this application cluster. The agent copies them, replicates them into the standalone control plane, and then brings back the status into your application cluster and also the secrets that are needed.
Oh.
And then then in this remote cluster, you're using those secrets and other stuff. So you don't have any you don't have Kubernetes application anymore. You just directly interact with Crossplane types as if you are in the same control plane with Crossplane, but you're actually not. It's just there could be many application clusters that connect to the single one central Crossplane cluster for infrastructure. So that's like, the main idea.
Oh, so the composition, where's the, it sounds like the composition or the infra provider is actually reside in the cross-plane, uh, call it control plane, right? The control plane one,
Yeah.
or you call it standalone one, whatever, the big one.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And in the outside, the application cluster, what type of CRs do they run? Do they run the like say Postgres, right? So the Postgres CR is actually is reconcile composite in the standalone one, but then it will pull those CRDs back, pushes and pull secret status. Where's the real Postgres CR run? The Postgres SQL CR
Yeah.
run?
So that resides in the dedicated control plane. So in dedicated control plane, you've got the requirement, composite, and also managed resources. Like for PostgreSQL, let's say you've got the PostgreSQL requirement and then PostgreSQL composite and like three other resources like network and other stuff, all in the dedicated control plane. In the application cluster, you've got only the requirement. You create the requirement and push it to the dedicated cluster for all this other stuff to be created, reconciled, and you only pull the result, which is like, secrets and also the status that you would like to use.
Oh, so sounds like if I understand correctly, that the application cluster is actually pretty thin. It doesn't run a lot of stuff, but most of the logic is actually in the dedicated control plane cross
Yeah.
whatever standalone. Oh, that I thought was reversed. So it's the other way around. Then what's the rationale for all the normally in a distributed world you want to things distributed, but this sounds like centralized. What's the rationale for this? What does it
Yeah.
achieve?
Yeah, so basically you can still have each cluster to have their own crossplane. For example, you can actually have your applications run in the crossplane standalone cluster. And like, let's say you've got like 10 clusters with 10 different, with 10 crossplane deployments that are all independent. But like if you would like to centralize the infrastructure for various reasons, like you might want to have one single view or all the infrastructure that your organization uses, or you might want to publish the same set of APIs to multiple teams and multiple clusters. So like that these are like the reasons that you might want to pull from a central cluster, but like it's still possible to go like either way. You can have workloads in the same cluster or like a different cluster. We're just changing the experience around the mode where you have single dedicated and like multiple clusters. We're just changing the experience from Kubernetes application to one that that you interact directly with the resources, both workload resources and also the crossplane resources.
So in that case, say, so after we separate out like the OM stack, OM whatever controller, and then user want to use OM, do they have to install that on the standalone crossplane control plane, or they can install that on the application side?
We're looking at bundling that with we're probably going to be calling this the Crossplane Operator that can include the Crossplane agent and in a nice tidy bundle that you could install, like with a kind of a meta bundle there. And so, be an all-in-one kind of a thing, but then you could still have the option of installing the individual home chart. So we're still working through that, but that's the high-level thinking right now. We need to.
So the install is installed from on the application cluster, and then
right. And that has the benefit of then OM can operate locally, and then we don't need like a remote OM, Yeah.
But the composition and the providers, for what about providers? Say I want to add like Azure provider. Do I add it on the application side or on the control plane side?
Yeah, so the providers are still over here in the standalone, and then you build your compositions and your unstructured definitions on the control cluster, and then it just replicates down the requirement CRDs for consumption.
So who owns this? For example, a user want to use say Azure, but the Azure is not the Crossplane central control plane is a AWS one, but someone wants to use Azure, so he needs to talk to some admin to add the Azure provider to the central place, right? The control plane part.
Yeah, maybe Muvafiq. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like to stick to like one common cluster, then yes, you have to like install all the providers that you'd like into that one single cluster. But if you don't want to, you can still, you know, have your application cluster to have Crossplane of its own, and you know, Azure provider as well. I think the like from the OM perspective, what will change will be like in the application cluster, we only expose the requirements. So there won't be possible, like it won't really be possible to create like directly managed resource, like PostgreSQL instance of like MySQL server of Azure or like GK cluster directly. Only the requirements are exposed. So the OAM components in the application clusters can only include requirement types. You can always, like only those ones will be, you know, synced to the actual central cluster. But like in case the like local scenario that you know the flight tracker, I guess, was deployed into, in that scenario nothing changes because like Crossplane works alongside OAM controller and all the other stuff. So it's just like, you know, changing it for the remote scenario.
Yeah, I also have another question. So are you going to, are you planning to host the Crossplane standalone somewhere on public cloud, or who will be responsible for maintaining that Crossplane standalone components? Because I see from that point of view, so everybody are actually working, I mean, the users are actually working on their local cluster, I will say the application cluster, right? So who will be the one who maintain the standalone Crossplane part?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the platform team or the DevOps team inside of SRE team inside of the company. And so they can maintain that like on their own Kubernetes you know, cluster, right? And then configure it with their, you know, providers and the resources that they want to make available, right? The infrastructure options. And then the app teams can basically, you know, have the Crossplane agent installed there to basically pull down those types so that they're available. And like Muvafiq was saying, we're still going to support the embedded mode, which doesn't require an agent. And so you could still do that if you want, but to enable consumption more easily from not just within Kubernetes natively, but also from other IAC tools like Terraform, you know, makes it a little bit cleaner.
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
Thank you very much.
This is very interesting architecture. I never think about that before.
Yeah, we probably need to read the proposal a little bit more to get the details.
Can you also share the slides?
Yeah, definitely. And I used the wrong slide background, so I'll switch that out for Crossplane. And,
okay.
So, yep.
Yeah, you're all welcome to provide feedback on the.
Yeah, I'm asking this because we are recently talking with the hybrid cloud team in Alibaba Cloud, so they are very interesting. So how Crossplane architecture is going forward. So it will be good that we can actually digest what's the design in this new proposal, and we will definitely let the hybrid cloud team in Alibaba know about that progress. I think it's a really interesting proposal. So I will keep inform you guys if anything happens in Alibaba side.
That's great, Harry.
Thanks.
All right, cool. So that's all we had in the agenda document here. And then looks like we're right about the 1 minute to the hour here. So if there are no further agenda items here, then we can go ahead and adjourn for the week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jared.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.